Welcome to the Vintage Ballers podcast. I'm your host, Brad Carino. And on today's episode, we have Purvis Cowens joining the show. Purvis is the son of MLB legend Al Cowens and spent years playing minor league baseball and as an MLB scout. So without further ado, please welcome Purvis Cowens. And, I want to, before we get started, Purvis, I want to give a shout out to Brett Muche for making this happen, AKA Mooch. And, real quick, how did you meet Brett? And, how did your friendship come about?
I met Brett. We still play in adult league baseball. And this was the craziest thing. We were playing, I think, on the same team. And we were talking. And he goes, I think I played against you in Canada. In the, what was the name of that league? I think it was the, oh, my God, Brad. I can't remember the name of the league, but anyways, we played against each other, and then we just got to talking and connecting, and that's my boy. Yeah,
Mooch is great. I've known. So Purvis, I grew up with him. He was my brother's best friend. So growing up as a little kid, they're about 10 years older than me. So I grew up. My love of baseball and sports in general is a big reason. Brett's a big reason for that because him and my brother were just sports nuts, and same with my dad. So I was just around it all the time. I was around baseball, basketball, football, nonstop. They're playing Tecmo Bowl and Baseball Stars and Double Dribble and all these old Nintendo games. So again, I my love for sports came from them. So it's cool to have, to see how everything kind of came full circle. And I get to interview now a lot of their friends and different athletes that they knew. So it's, it's pretty cool. And going back, I want to take it to your childhood. And obviously your father, I was telling my dad, you're going to be on the show. And right away, he knew exactly who your dad was. He's like, I remember Al very well. He's a good hitter, solid hitter, always hitting like 270, 280. And, I want to take it back to your youth, Purvis. And where did you grow up? And what was it like growing up with a star baseball player as a father?
I grew up in Cerritos, California, but we moved all over the place. So we would start school in Cerritos. And then when it was baseball season, it was time to pack up and go and be with my dad. So I was just always over the place. And as far as growing up, Brad, actually, I thought that was normal. But looking back on it, that's not a normal life. It's a good life, but it's not normal. So I just thought that was the thing to do. Hanging out in the clubhouse, talking to George Brett, the Hal McRae's, the Amos Otis, Frank White's. I thought that was normal. So yeah, I lived in Cerritos, lived half the time in Kansas City. And then when he got traded to the Angels, that was a short stay. He was only with the Angels for 3 months. And then Detroit. So we just did the same process. And then he ended up his career with the Seattle Mariners, and we pretty much did the same thing. When he retired, I think I was a sophomore in high school. So I never got to do the things other kids got to do, like play Little League All-Stars, play football. Well, I wasn't going to play football anyway. But I never got to do the Little League thing, play on the All-Star team. But you know what? I got to play in major league ballparks. So I guess it all averaged out.
oh, heck yeah. I mean, one of my friends is Todd Blyleven, Bert's son. And he was talking about how when he was little, very similar stories to you. He actually remembers your father very well too. I told him you're going to be on the show. And so he was in the, Pirates dugout back in 1979 when they had, I think it was Willie Stargell and Dave Parker and those guys when they won the World Series. And he remembers, of course, the Twins. His father was on the 87 Twins with Ken Herbeck and Kirby Puckett. He said Kirby Puckett was one of his favorite players of all time. So he was a kid then still. He was in high school, whatever he was. So he, much like you, I want to hear some of your stories because he took it for granted. He didn't, at the time, I didn't really realize that, like you said, not everyone has this lifestyle. I mean, you're growing up with a father who's a baseball star. And back in those days, baseball was even bigger than it is now in some ways. It was the American sport back then. And, people don't realize how big the stars of baseball were in those days. And for you to grow up in that atmosphere and not probably realize how big it was is something else. So take it back to like the Royals, for example, George Brett, those guys. What was it like growing up around these iconic stars like that?
Like I said, I really didn't know it was that big, but it was awesome. It was fun. George Brett was my favorite player growing up. And I mean, still is one of my favorite because I got to see his daily, I got to see him on a daily basis.
Purvis, what did he do on a daily basis? Like, what was his work ethic like?
Just the way he would be out early, taking ground balls, throwing from third to first. And his hitting, he just took it to another level. He worked a lot with Charlie Lau, like off the tee, like the first one in, the last one out type of deal. And then as a kid, I would see how he was just so Mr. Clutch. It was crazy. He was just so Mr. Clutch. And I have a story for you. What year was that? I think 89. He was still playing. My dad wasn't playing. They had an old timers game in Kansas City. It was the old, maybe 77 Royals against the 77 Yankees. Now, I remember watching those guys like in the heat of the moment during that time. And then to see them hella old, it was kind of weird. And Bo Jackson's on the team. I got to meet Bo.
Oh, wow.
Willie was playing. I still, I knew Willie. But that old timers game it just took me back and it floored me. My dad's like, hey, come out, you're gonna go with me to the game, the 3 days of festivities and then the game. And man, it was awesome. But anyways, getting back to the story, I guess George was slumping and wasn't hitting too well, and he was watching video of himself. And me and my dad went and sat by him. We were talking, and he's rewinding stuff. And my dad's telling him, hey, look, you're doing this and you're doing that. And George goes, after about 30 minutes of that, he shuts off the video. He goes, I'm going to go 5 for 5 tonight. And he gets up and walks away. And I'm like, Dad, he's not going 5 for 5, is he? He goes, if George said he's going 5 for 5, he's going 5 for 5. And you know what? That night, he went 5 for 5.
No kidding.
No.
Wow.
No joke.
I mean, your father and George, what was their relationship like?
They were really good friends. Really good friends. George is from California. We're from California. He went to El Segundo, and they just hit it off. They were really good friends.
I mean, the Royals legends, both of them are, and to have grown up together in a sense, back in those days.
Right.
And what was it like in the dugout at that time? Like as a little kid, or, what was the feeling like in the dugout? Did you, that experience must've been surreal.
Yeah. It was crazy. I was always there in the dugout with my uniform, trying to sneak on the field, trying to go out, grab bats, wanting to go down the outfield lines and be the ball boy to catch the foul balls. But now Pops wouldn't let me do all that. But I did get to sit and just watch and listen and learn. It was amazing.
Do you have any favorite stories from back in those days?
Yeah, I think one that pops out right now is every year we would have a father and son game, where the people would come in and we would get the uniforms, and the kids would play against the players, play against their dads, and it would be infants out there with Royal uniforms on. The wives are on the field. I mean, it was great, but I can't remember what year, but the first time I could remember we did it, George Brett was always a pitcher against us. We used wiffle balls, throw down bases, but he hit Barry Otis, Amos Otis' son, not on purpose. He throws a wiffle ball gets away, whatever. Barry charges the mound, and all the Royals kids, we followed him, and we pretty much jumped George Brett. So they made this a tradition. Every year he would hit Barry Otis, and we got to jump George Brett. That was pretty cool.
Oh, that is awesome.
How many
That's a
people,
great story,
yeah, how many people can say they were able to jump George Ritt?
especially in a wiffle ball game. Yeah, at Royal
Right.
Stadium. Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Oh my God. That's I mean, when you look back, like God, that must have so many moments like that. I'm sure you cherish those. For those who never got to see your dad play, the younger generation that never got to see Al play, give them a background of his career and what he was like as a player.
Background in his career. Went to Centennial High School in Compton, was a low draft pick. I think him and Keith Hernandez was the lowest draft picks ever to actually make it to the major leagues and have decent careers.
Really?
So he was one of those guys that wasn't supposed to make it, but he worked his butt off, and he goes to minors. And what was he telling me? He had a really good spring training when he was 22, and it didn't look like he was going to make the team, but the guys stuck up for him. He said Amos, Hal, John Mayberry, the older African-American players stood up for him and goes, hey, if he doesn't go to Kansas City, we're not going to Kansas City. So they gave him a shot. And as a rookie, he would come off the bench or whatever. And then I think they got rid of Vada Pinson, and he became the right fielder. And he had a pretty good career in KC. And 77, batted 312, 23 home runs, won a Gold Glove, runner-up MVP behind Rod Carew. But those guys stood up for him. And when he was telling me that was really huge. And today, you don't see a lot of guys doing that. Who's going to say that? If he doesn't go, I'm not going to go. Because there's so much money involved now. Like, no one's going to do that.
Yep. Oh, that's a good point. And what about, back then too? I feel like guys stayed longer at the teams. Obviously, I know salary cap was different. It was different, but it just seemed like you had the rivalries today, to me, aren't like they were back then. I know people argue that there's so much movement now, and you kind of tell the same teams get the best players, Yankees, Dodgers, et cetera, because they have the money. And I still love baseball. I still watch it. I'm from Cleveland, so I'm a Guardians fan / Indians fan. And, but it seemed back in those days, the rivalries were just different, in all sports really, but especially for baseball. How do you, what do you think about that?
I agree with you. Back then, the players were more loyal, and they grew up in the organization, and they seemed to stay in the organization a little longer. But I remember the Royals and Yankees, they hated each other, like for real. Like they just didn't like each other. So yeah, it was way more intense. And I totally agree with what you're saying. Today it's, they talk about the rivalries, but I mean, it's nothing like back in the 70s, 80s. Yeah.
So, I mean, Purvis, I was watching, actually, I rewatched the Ed Farmer fight with your father. And it was funny because back in those days, fights are they're so common. And it was,
right.
You always saw one. And that was just how old school baseball was played. You hit, I mean, I remember, I think Ed hit your father in the head, I believe. Didn't he break his jawbone or something?
Broke his jaw, yeah.
Yeah. And he broke the wrist of another player, I think. Yeah. So, and then of course your dad charged him, and it was a whole fight. Take us through that sequence. Do you remember anything about that? And what was that like? It's one of the most iconic fights of that whole era. And what do you remember a lot about it?
I do. I remember when he got his jaw broken. Where were I don't know, but I used to tape his away games, tape his bats. So when he got home, he would watch the videos. But I remember videoing that and watching that and seeing him on the ground, and and then him coming home and having to be wired up for I don't know how long, and not being able to eat, and my mom blending up food and he's struggling to eat. It was like one of the saddest times for me, to see my idol, my dad, like in that situation. But as far as a fight, he really didn't talk too much about it, or I'm gonna do this. But I guess Tony La Russa is like known to have his pitchers throw at people, like certain guys. So, I mean, there was a lot of rumors about that because that night he broke my dad's jaw. He broke Frankel White's wrist, and they also hit George Brett. So I don't know. Maybe my dad had something in his mind to where this was done on purpose. Me personally, I wouldn't like to believe that, but hey, you know.
And I think I read somewhere that they actually kind of made up afterward or shook hands. Yeah. Okay. Yep. That's what I thought. And I think I read something about that. So it was interesting how that turned out. I mean, and back then, you know, that was old school baseball. I mean, I hate to say it, but it just, it is what it is. I mean, it was just like basketball when you had the Celtics Lakers fights.
Yeah.
That is just what it is. I mean, they just, that's how it was played back then. And, you know, I mean, love it or hate it, that's how it was. Of course, I think as fans, we all enjoyed it, but I'm sure as a son of someone who went through it, that wasn't very enjoyable watching your dad go through that, obviously.
Right. Exactly.
So some of the guys, and I want to get to your career here in a second, but before then, you know, all the guys your dad played with in that era, I mean, Reggie Jackson, we can go down the list. There's this one great player after another, Hall of Famer after Hall of Famer. Were there any that he told you about where he was like, that guy's incredible, this guy's really good?
I think here. Who was one of his favorites? Well, George, of course. Puckett. He did mention Puckett. And, you know, they would talk when the Twins would come in town to Seattle. I'm trying to think. Who else did he really, really like a lot? Dewey Evans. Jim Rice. Mm-hmm. I'm sure it's more, but those are the ones that stands out that he would. Oh, Cal Ripken.
Oh, Ripken. I was at the game. It was an Indians game back in '95, and it was actually the game that we clinched the playoff berth for the first time in 42 years. We haven't made it for 42 years, and that was a day after Cal had broken the record, or I'm saying 2 days after he had, you know, broken the record. So it was an incredible game. It was his first road game after, so he got a standing ovation, and then of course the Indians clinched, and it was just incredible. Wow. But anyway, I'll never forget that game. I was 12 years old with my dad, and it was just, I mean, baseball back then, it was just the best. But what about pitching wise? What is there any pitchers that gave your father problems throughout his career?
Yes. What's his name? Bobby Witt.
Oh, really?
Yes.
No kidding.
Gave him problems. I would hear about that one. Oh man, Bobby Witt tomorrow, nasty curveball, you know, whatever. And it was days where, you know, they're playing the Angels and they're here and we're driving the game. And him and Dave Henderson are, man, I don't want to be in the lineup tonight. Yeah. He gave Hindu and my dad hell.
No kidding. I haven't heard that name in a while. Bobby Witt. Wow.
Yeah.
And when you look back now at your youth, obviously having your father being who he was, I'm sure baseball was your first love, but you know, how did your career transpire after that point? I mean, how did you say you couldn't play much Little League, obviously, because you're moving around a lot. So how did you get into baseball and how did your career start?
Well, I was always into it, like you said, because I was around it. But, you know, didn't do the little league thing. My high school career was kind of funky. So, I mean, after that, I went to a JC and then played 2 years there and then went on to Cal State Hayward University. Played 2 years there and then got picked up to go play in the East Coast Indie Ball. So I did that. And
what position?
What they signed me as a outfielder, but I ended up playing third base and first.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they transferred me over to third base and first. I mean, honestly, you know, I'm a big guy. I've always been big. Like, I couldn't run with those brothers out there in the outfield. You know, they're running 6'4", 6. You know, I was like a 7'2", but I had a good arm and, you know, could hit a little bit. And
how'd you like third base?
I like third base. Yeah.
You got a lot of hot balls coming at you there.
I mean, react. You just react.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
You're going to make the play or you're not.
Yep.
But I like third base. And then after that, when I realized, you know, I had a kid at a young age. So, you know, I had to make a choice, you know, keep playing, running around playing ball or take care of my family. So after that, I started coaching and teaching at the Compton Unified School District because, I mean, I still do. I have a passion to give back to the less privileged kids. And that's what I started doing. And then I got into scouting. And that was really cool because I got to see the sport from a different aspect.
And who did you scout for?
I started out with the Minnesota Twins.
No kidding.
Associate for 5 years with the Twins. Then I went with the Royals for like 3 months. And then that was part-time. And then a full-time position came up with the Major League Scouting Bureau. So I had to leave. I didn't have to leave the Royals, but I decided to go ahead and do this full-time. And yeah, that's what I did.
And what was your experience like as a scout?
It was interesting. It was interesting. It was, did I lose you there? Okay.
No, you're good.
I didn't lose you. It was really interesting to see the game on a different side, you know, to where numbers matter. Makeup matters. Who they hang out with matters. And I, you know, as a player, you don't know all that. But yeah, I got to see the other side and where a player can make it and not make it. That's where it starts with the scout. So,
Purvis, do you remember any specific players you scouted that ended up being great major league players?
When I went with the Bureau, my job was to videotape and do a report and submit that to all 30 teams. So I had the top guys in the country, the Strasburgs, the Harpers, the Rendones, everybody that's playing now, I did work on them. But that was a specific job. You know, hey, these are the top guys. These are going to be the high draft picks. West Coast, Midwest, East Coast, get it done. I had a list and I had a time frame to get it done. And yeah, so all the guys, all the major guys.
And what would you tell a young scout coming into it? What would be your advice to that scout?
I would tell him to, obviously he has a passion for it, but hold your ground. If you believe in something, you believe in the kid, you believe in the player, stay firm, hold your ground. And I mean, that's really all I can tell them, because you could be persuaded. You can, maybe you like a guy, but you're in the draft rooms and everybody's like, no. And then you change up your mind. To me, I'm really big on, my word and keeping my ground. So that's the main thing I would tell a young scout.
And how much do you think of scouting is kind of intuition? Is kind of like seeing a kid, and you're like, you know what? I just have a good feeling about this kid.
I think it's a lot. I think it's like 80%, because I mean, that's your gut. I mean, you feel how you feel for a reason. And yeah, you got to follow your gut.
I mean, I feel it's one of the things that's kind of lost nowadays in sports. I mean, it's so everything's based on analytics now, which is fine. I mean, I understand numbers have to bear out, and I get that. But I think we've almost lost the art of intuition and kind of, going with your gut in some ways, because that's how a lot of sports was played years ago, and right. I wanted to get your take on that.
Yeah. I totally agree. Like we have lost the feel for the game. I do a lot of private lessons and coaching travel ball team and I'm not going to complain about it because I love it, but a lot of the stuff now is like so robotic and a show and all these different crazy drills. And then it's just like, I'm doing this. Why? For a show, for the parents. So, but try to do that in the classroom. Try to teach math for 15 minutes, science for 15 minutes, English for 15 minutes, and you're jumping all around. It looks good, but what are we really learning? I'm more old school. I want to be hands-on, a lot of reps, show you what to do. Hey, we're going to do this. Okay, now you got the hang of it. Let's get into a lot of reps. And But hey, that's just how it is right now. Roll with it.
And Purvis, how do you think social media has played in the role with the younger players? Because obviously back in your father's generation, and even when I grew up in the 90s, there was no social media. So, you had, and I talked to Todd Blyleven about this too. And obviously he was saying how guys like Ricky Henderson are kind of, you don't even hear about him anymore. He's one of the greatest, guys like Kirby and your father and all these guys that played in that era, because it wasn't a social media driven era. You don't hear as much about them as you do the guys in the last 15, 20 years. What is your take on that? And how do you think social media plays a role in the younger players coming up?
I think social media plays a big role because everybody want to watch a video, and that's where it is. Like I was saying, with these drills and everybody want to make a hitting video, and it's that influences the kids a lot. So this generation, they don't know the history of baseball. When I was coming up playing, I knew about Jackie Robinson. I knew about Babe Ruth. I knew about the, all the older greats. I mean, these kids, they don't have a clue. It's all about what social media is pushing and what they're seeing on TV. And that's pretty much it.
It's funny because I run a basketball page on Instagram called the 90s NBA, and I have over 250 90s players that follow the page from that era. So I mean, a ton of different guys, and it's funny because the kids obviously know MJ. Everybody knows MJ, but they forget about guys like Akeem Olajuwon. I've had people come to me and say, "Who's Akeem Olajuwon?" And I'm like, "Akeem Olajuwon, it's one of the greatest players of all time," but they have no clue because all they see is MJ, really. MJ and Shaq, but so it's. I think baseball is kind of similar, where they only see certain guys. But they forget about your father and George Brett and Ricky Henderson. And you can go down the list of all the great players of that era, Ozzie Smith. And, you had legends, Hall of Famers that played back in those days that people don't even know about.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree with you. It's sad.
It really is. And when you talk about the history of the game, Purvis, my father taught me a lot. I mean, my father grew up next door to Rocky Calavito back in the 50s.
Wow.
So, he knew, baseball is his first love because of Rocky. And so I knew all about those guys back in those days because of my dad. He would tell me about all the different players back in the 50s, 60s, 70s. I knew about Sandy Koufax and Bob Gibson and all these guys because he would talk about them. So my grandpa would talk about them. So, you don't have that anymore. It feels like in baseball, it's kind of sad to see the tradition. I wouldn't say it's dying, but it's just not what it was even 20, 30 years ago.
Right. Absolutely right.
So, let's take it now to, what are you doing nowadays? And, actually Brett Miche had I was talking to him yesterday a little bit, and he wanted me to ask you about, there was an announcer for the Seattle Mariners, I believe. And there's a story he wanted me to tell you, Dave, is it Nihas?
Yeah.
And he wanted me to ask you a story about him. And I think it was about camps or something. I'm not sure what that would have been. Helping out with camps or something.
I'm trying to think. Well, let's get back to what I'm doing now, and then I'm sure that story will pop up.
It'll come to you.
Yeah. Right now, I'm just I'm doing coaching travel ball team. I work for GBG. That's the Garcia Parra baseball group.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I'm coaching kids, and then also doing private lessons, and still debating on if I want to take this high school coaching job or not. So everything I'm doing, Brad, is related to baseball. Just because it's a good fit for me, it feels right. It feels right. So that's what I'm currently doing. Knee house. I'm trying to think of what I told him, because me and Mooch, we sit around and talk about so much stuff. But Niehaus was, he's amazing broadcaster. I don't know if you remember. My, oh my.
Yeah. I remember that. I didn't know that was, I never knew his name, but I remember, when did he retire?
He didn't. He passed away a couple years ago.
Okay. So I remember watching, I want to say it was when Big Unit and Griffey and those guys were there back in the 90s and hearing some of that.
Right. Well, that was his thing. My, oh my. The Seattle Mariners. My, oh my.
Now, when did you first meet him?
82. I think my dad got over there.
You knew him a lot. Yeah, a long time.
No, 82. And then when I would just take trips up there afterwards. In my adult years, I would always go and see those guys and reminisce. And yeah, it was cool. The Niehaus story though, Brad.
I know Mooch is going to watch this and he's probably thinking, come on, Brad, I told you he said something about the camps and I can't remember what exactly he was referring to.
Well, he just helped me do a camp.
Maybe that's what he's talking about.
Recently. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
He
helped me do a camp. It was pretty cool. He drove down from San Diego. We got to spend time together the night before and hang out, and we did the camp and exhausted. And the next day we went out and played a baseball game together.
Wow.
So great guy.
And do you have any favorite Mooch stories?
Oh my God.
There's probably a ton of them.
Yeah. Hey, Mooch, man. Never,
I know.
Never a dull moment with that guy.
No, there isn't.
Never a dull. I mean, every time we're together, it's a story. So I really can,
So when I was younger, Purvis, he'll laugh when he watches this. My brother and him would always play pickup basketball games against each other. It was like late 80s. I was probably 5 years old. And I had a sandbox right by where the basketball court was. And I built this castle. I was all proud of it. I went in to take a nap and I come back out and those guys had knocked it down with their basketball. So I walked over there and I swore to him. I said, you MF, you knocked down my, and they were laughing so hard because this little 5-year-old kid. And I was so angry that they knocked it down. And Mooch always brings it up to me. Those kind of stories. I remember when you swore at me when you were like 5 years old, So, oh yeah, we have all types of stories with Mooch. But he was just, he is one of the funny, and he's a great storyteller too. I'm trying to get him on the podcast, and he won't. I'm like, Brett, come on my podcast, because he's one of the funniest storytellers. But yeah, he's a great guy, and I'm sure you have a ton of stories with him.
Yeah.
Purvis, what is it like playing in the leagues now, especially with guys that you probably either played with 25 years ago or played against? That has to be really cool.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. We're a little older. Lost a couple steps, but you know what? Those guys are pretty good. Those guys are still pretty good, and it's fun. It's competitive, but it's no hate. It's really positive, and we just play and try to win a game. And after the game, we all hook up and go have a meal. It's awesome.
Yeah, that has to be awesome.
Yeah, to be doing something you love at 50. Hell, my father passed away at 50.
Wow.
So I'm going to take advantage of every ounce of life that I have.
I love it. And speaking of your father, not to bring up a bad memory, but when he passed away, how did that affect you?
Oh, I was shook for a while. I think I just actually started to get over it. And Mooch was one of the guys that helped me with that. It had to be about 3 or 4 years ago. And we just had a conversation and he was like, man, you're hurting. And he's telling me about his experience. I think his father as well passed away or something.
Yep.
And we just had so much in common. And I started turning the corner. And that's crazy. That was like 3 years ago. So it affected me and hit me really hard.
I mean, right now I'm having, there's medical issues with my father as well. So we don't know what that's going to look like. And it sucks. I mean, it's terrible to, it's a parent and it's someone you're close to. I can't imagine, going through that. So, my heart goes out to you and Mooch, losing your fathers. And I know that you were very close with your father all those years. So, it's a devastating loss. It's a devastating loss.
Hear about your pops.
Well,
I'll be praying for you guys.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Purvis. And I have a few more questions for you. And I want to thank you for coming on and doing this.
Yeah, no problem.
Who is outside of your father and George Brett, who is your all-time favorite player?
All-time favorite. I would have to say Bo Jackson.
Love Bo. Love him.
Yeah. Bo Jackson. Amazing.
What was it like meeting him back in those days?
Oh, dude, it was well, I said I was at that old timers game and he was in the dugout and the players, some of the current players were in the dugout. Willie Wilson, was there. Willie could run and Bo could run. And Willie was messing around with Bo, throwing sunflower seeds on them and spitting sunflower seeds on them. And Bo goes, hey, man, you better stop, because he goes, I know you think you're fast, but I will chase you down and choke you with my thighs. And I'm sitting there like, I'm like this, laughing. And then, you know, of course, Willie left him alone. Wise choice, right? So then a couple of pitches later, somebody hits the fly, old Yankee hit the fly ball to my dad, and he catches the ball. And Bo Jackson's like, oh my God, that's Al Cowens. I used to watch it. And then Willie goes, that's his son right there. And he's like, oh my God, are you serious? Nice to meet you. And I'm like, you're Bo Jackson. You're Bo Jackson. So it was cool.
Oh, that is awesome. That is cool that he remembered your dad like that, and that he had that kind of, you know, respect for your dad.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never forget the play where Bo, I think we caught the ball and ran up the side of the wall and came down. Yeah. I mean, he was a freak of nature. I remember back in those days, him and Deion Sanders playing those two sports at a high level. I mean, especially Bo. It's like, I just never have seen anything like that. I wish we would see that. We'll probably never see it again because of how sports are now. But back then, have several guys do that and to play at high levels at their sports. I mean, just incredible, absolutely incredible. Awesome. I remember I still use Bo on Tecmo Bowl every time I'd pop in the old Tecmo Bowl on Nintendo. Couldn't stop him. Oh, you
couldn't tackle him.
You couldn't tackle him. If you didn't pick that specific play, he was gone. You have no chance against him.
Right.
So yeah. Speaking of Mooch, he'll remember that because him and my brother had some battles back then. So, oh yeah. We played a ton baseball stars, and then they would accuse each other of cheating. It was the best thing ever. You know, baseball stars, double dribble, Tecmo Bowl. Those were the games back then. I mean, I was a little kid. We played those all the time. It was the best.
RBI baseball.
Oh yeah. They were the best. I wish I can go back, and I still have tons of those games in my other room, and every now and then we'll plug it in. And my nephews got to play it one time, and they're like, "What is this?" I'm like, this was the best thing back in the late 80s.
Right.
So to leave it off, I want to ask you, I ask every guest this question. And when you look back, 20 years from now at your life and your career, what do you want people to know about the legacy of Purvis Cowens?
The legacy that that I went hard at everything I did, and just try to enjoy the journey, enjoy the experience. People that know me, they're like, hey, that guy has a lot of fun. And yeah, that's what I would mainly want people to remember. Like, hey, he had fun, he went hard, went 110% at everything, and just enjoy the moment, every moment.
I mean, that's what it's all about. The older I get, I'm starting to realize it is truly about enjoying the moment. You're not promised tomorrow. You're not promised health. You're not promised family and friends. So you got to live life that way. And I think I wish I could have realized that 20 years ago. But, at this point, I'm very happy to just be doing what I'm doing now. So I appreciate that. I think people listening to this can really, especially the younger generation, take that to heart, because I'll tell you what, life goes by really fast.
Really fast.
Really does. Well, Purvis, thank you so much for coming on and doing this. And it's been awesome talking to you. And it was so fun to hear the stories when you were a kid and with your father, and then to hear how that kind of inspired you, and then getting into baseball yourself and scouting. And it's just a pretty awesome life you've lived so far.
All right. Thank you, man. This was a pleasure. And any time, man.
Sounds good, man. Well, I'll be in touch. And, again, appreciate you doing this, Purvis.
All righty. Thank you, Brad.
Thanks.
Nice. All right.
You too. Okay.
All right.
Bye.